It's very important to understand that the way people think doesn't just develop in a vacuum. It develops very often by what they're taught, which can either be in social teachings, such as going to school, or it can be through religious teachings or parental teachings. All of these have great influence on a person. Of course, what is modeled by the people around them also have enormous influence. There's a very significant reason why it's going to take many decades to eradicate Islamic hatred of Jews. And that's because it is part of what they are taught. They are indoctrinated with a enormous bias, a bias that leads to hate, or it's a bias which is hateful against the Jewish people. And here is a little bit of a background so that anyone can understand why it is that so many Muslims, I'm not going to say all Muslims, but so many Muslims hate Jews with a hate which it just seems like, is so extreme. Let's watch this very informative video.
But there is a big problem why Jew hatred cannot easily be taken out of Islamic culture. If you look at the Quran itself, if you look at the history of Islam, if you go back to the 7th century, you don't have to go back to the 1948. 1948 is not the reason why they hate Jews. This is an excuse. In the 7th century, Muhammad started his message in Mecca, wanting an Arab religion, a religion that stems from inside the Arab world. And he linked it to the Abrahamic religion to get some credibility and asked his people to believe in him as the Messiah. His people in Mecca rejected him. He spent 13 years in Mecca trying to spread Islam, and he only had 150 followers. Then he decided that peaceful means of spreading his message will not work. He left Mecca and moved to Medina. Medina was a Jewish town. The word Medina was even a Jewish word. It got taken by Arabs. Now it's a word that means city, but it's originally a Jewish town. And he went there. The Jews didn't kill him, didn't ask him anything. They welcomed him, as a matter of fact. In his early writings in the Quran, he mentioned the Jews in a very favorable way. He called them guidance and light in the Quran, righteous people, excelled the nations. But when the Jews rejected to convert to Islam, that was the big slap on him. He was not credible in front of his Mecca people because he told them, I have an Abrahamic religion. I'm going to be the Messiah. The Jews are going to support me. I'm going to go live with the Jews because they're going to support me. And when the Jews didn't convert, he simply flipped. All the good things he said in the Quran about the Jews, the good stuff, completely the opposite. He started calling them apes, pigs, enemies of Allah, because he could not find the legitimacy he was hungry for. All he had were warring warriors, fringe people, fringe tribes that were poor, that wanted to follow him just to benefit from him. And he looked at the Jewish tribes. They were prosperous and they earned a living from hard work. Muhammad, in many of his hadiths, and I'm quoting Muhammad, I became wealthy through terror. He became wealthy through stopping the Mecca people, his own tribe, his own people. He would stop and kill them and rob the caravans, the trade caravans. And what happened is he started looking back as a prophet. What kind of prophet lives in a city asking the Jewish tribe, those prosperous Jewish tribe to convert to him, and he's robbing his family in the caravan? They are prosperous through hard work. He started looking back. It was time for him to take their wealth and kick them out to start looking good, which he did. He expelled many and killed many. And the last tribe, he took all the male puberty, killed them. Almost 900 men of one tribe. He beheaded them. They dug trenches and he beheaded them in bunches of 12s. He and his warriors spent 2 days beheading. That was the first Holocaust on the Jews. It was a beheading. And even him, after he did that, he took the women as slaves and the children as slaves, converted them to Islam by force, and they took many of the young women as sexual slaves. Muhammad, the prophet of Islam, had the first pick of the sexual slave. Her name was Safiya, and she stayed under his sexual slavery until she died. Even by Arabian Peninsula standards, the actions of Muhammad were not holy. Something had to be done to save Islam and its reputation. The Quran had to be changed to call Jews, they deserve what happened to them. You don't need to be a psychiatrist or a psychologist or a sociologist to understand why all of this hatred. Where did it come from? The Jews had to be called apes, pigs, and enemies of Allah, a description that's being said by every Muslim leader today. This was the only solution to save Muhammad's reputation, to save Islam. Islam has an existential problem. If Islam makes peace with the Jews and treats them as human beings, not as apes and pigs and descendants. What Morsi said was they are descendants of apes and pigs. If Islam makes peace with that, then they're going to look at their prophet as a murderer. So it's an existential problem within Islam to hate and reject not only Jews, but Jews and Christians and anybody, the enemies of Allah. Because Muhammad kicked out the Christians also and kicked outside the Arabian Peninsula. And on his deathbed, he entrusted his followers. His last words on his deathbed was, go chase the Jews and kill them wherever you find them, even if they hide behind a rock and a tree. He died in agony of what he did, but he didn't want to go down alone. He wanted everybody around him to do exactly what he did. This is a tragedy of Shakespearean levels here. And nobody notices it. All you need to do is you don't need to be a psychiatrist. Really, just read the Quran. You will see the story telling itself. Muslims today have a very hard time reconciling, because to reconcile with the Jews means they have to admit that Islam was wrong. It's an existential problem. And that's why when Muhammad died, his followers did what he commanded. They went and conquered Egypt, conquered Persia in the same year. And then they went to Jerusalem, where the Jews are, and said, okay, now this is ours. We're going to build a mosque right on top of your temple, because now our prophet doesn't want you to exist anymore. And this is the only way we can make your memory gone and make Islam's grave secret gone. It's almost by replacing you. The fact that they built a mosque on top of the ruins of the temple is a deep wish to replace the Jewish people. It's like somebody killing somebody and taking their identity. And nobody talks about that. No Arab or Muslim understand that. Even when Muhammad was doing after, there were verses in the Quran that reflected the agony he was in and the agony of the people who were doing the killing with. He had many verses in the Quran telling them, don't feel guilty about killing. It's not your hands that is killing. It's the hands of Allah. Don't worry. You're going to be honored for killing them. You're going to go to heaven for killing them. The verse after verse after verse in the Quran comforting the Muslim warriors and the murderers, telling them that you will go to heaven if you kill the Jews and kill the infidels and kill the non-Muslims. Verses telling that it's not your hand that has the blood on it. I don't understand. I mean, it's so simple. They felt very guilty, and many of them ran away. They didn't want to go because some of the Arabs who were encouraged by Muhammad to go kill the Jews in Medina were their friends. They lived and grew up with them. They knew them. They didn't want to go kill them. And Muhammad said, threatened them. He said, you're going to be tortured and killed. Allah is not going to love you anymore. You're going to be cursed. Verses after verses after verses in the Quran cursing Muslims who don't want to kill. And verses after verses after verses in the Quran telling those who kill you're going to go to heaven. Glorifying killing became the only escape for Islam. And this is the tragedy we're living with for 1400 years. And that's why the number one enemy of Islam is the truth. Why are we doing this to ourselves? Why are we giving them our dollars to come and kill us and to finance Osama bin Laden? It's time for America, hands off saving Muslims from themselves. Stop trying to rescue people who look down on you. And the more you rescue them, the more they hate you because they feel inferior. It's time for us to let them learn from their mistakes. When we keep rescuing from themselves, they end up hating us, not loving us, because they don't want to be they don't want to be rescued by people they call apes and pigs and enemies of Allah. It's tough on their pride. And we keep doing that every time. Why do we do it with the Arabs? Why? Islam is rotting from the core, and that's why there is a lot of turmoil, because they are not at peace with themselves. They are not at peace with them. Islam did not give them peace. And that's why We have to understand that we have the power. We have the truth on our side. I want to see the Jewish people get offended. Please get offended when they say lies about you. I want a demonstration when they call you all these names. When they say, oh, 9/11, the Jews did it. I will be heading the demonstration in front of the United Nations. Because you always take the higher road. Because you look at these accusations, it's a joke. And I know it's a joke. But the problem is, this is not a joke to 1.2 billion people. We have to start a movement against slandering and lying about the Jewish people. And I don't want to call it anti-Semitism anymore. I just want to call it slander and lies. I don't have to be Jewish to stand for the truth about Israel, to stand for the truth about the Jewish people. I owe it to you to speak the truth because my culture of origin have committed slander and lies, and it's time to end it because it's not good for you, it's not good for them. And that's why we have to speak out. We have to make a big deal every time these lies happen. Arab terrorism is not just destroying or hurting Israel, hurting America, 9/11. It's destroying the moral fabric and goodness in Arab society. And it's time to speak about it. Open up. And I encourage all Arabs to start and speak because I know many of them. Many of them agree with me.
Wow, that was powerful and very informative. It's not just destroying the moral fabric and goodness of the Arab society. It's actually, as we have seen over the last year and a half, it's affecting the moral fabric and goodness of the entire world, the entire West. The whole world is being impacted by this. Why? Because they're being bought into the lies. And that's the reason why it's so critical. As she said, she's getting to the essence of it, that we cannot accept a single lie. When something is not honest, we have to call it out. In other words, just because there are people who are living a life which is not on the level of the West, which seems to be a very compromised quality of life, which has many reasons for the reason it is the way it is, and it's not Israel's fault, that we don't need to have sympathy and buy into their lies because we're feeling bad for them. It's like someone who breaks into your house, they're stealing your goods, and then they tell you, well, I don't have anything. So what are you going to say? Just take all of my stuff? That corrupts the world. That's not the solution to poverty. And that's not the solution to a people who live a third-class life and then bring their terrorism onto other people.